Hey, hi, hello. I'm Jess, and welcome to Word Wonders. Like I said, my name is Jess, and I am a teacher, specifically in reading. I work specifically with students who struggle with reading, writing, spelling, all that stuff. So I do have a decent amount of training in specifically the English language, some of the rules that go along with the English language, some of the background knowledge. A lot of people think English is a super frustrating language to speak, to spell, to write, and it definitely can be because it's made up of a bunch of different languages kind of smashed together. There are some rules to follow, and there are definitely some interesting things about the English language, like there probably is with any language. So I think I'm going to give you like a little bit of background on like my reading journey. In elementary school, I definitely liked reading. I wasn't like super into it. I loved Magic Tree House, loved when the Scholastic Book Fair came through, loved checking out books from the library. And then when I got into like middle school, like 5th grade, I really didn't read at all other than what was required in school. So that kind of continued for years. When I moved in 8th grade, while we were looking for a house and stuff like that, and I didn't really have much contact with anyone, I did a lot of reading again. 9th grade, 10th grade, didn't really do a lot of reading. And then Twilight movies came out, and I decided that I wanted to read those books. I went and saw all 4 movies, or actually all 5 movies, and I really enjoyed those books. Vampires and werewolves were like a huge thing when I was in high school. And for those of you that are like, oh my god, you didn't read the Harry Potter series growing up, Harry Potter was popular when I was like in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and at that time like I didn't do a lot of like long readings, and the length of the books really intimidated me, so I did not read them. I still have not read them. My husband owns them all, so I could read them. I should probably read them, but I haven't. Then didn't really do much reading else. I went to college, didn't do any reading really other than what was required. However, there is one book that I read for a creative nonfiction class that I really enjoyed, that I would definitely read again, and it's one of the only books I read all the way through. It's just The Glass Castle. Highly recommend. I would definitely read it again. I didn't do a whole lot of reading when I started teaching, other than like what I needed to do for classes or whatever to work with students. I think maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago, because it was right when we got back from COVID in 2020, so like the fall of 2020. I was teaching this comprehension class. We decided that we were going to read the first Divergent, and so I read that with them. Obviously I was reading ahead and then reading it with them and doing stuff with them, and I really liked that book. I always liked the movies, I just never read the books. So I decided to read the rest of the series. So I've read all 3, I think it was 3 or 4. Now I can't remember, it's been a while. I read all of those, so that's the second series that I read all the way through. And right now I've just started reading 2 books. Day the World Came to Town, and then the other one is called A Teacher. And they're very different books. I often don't read multiple books at one time just because I don't want to get confused, and I definitely have a hard time following like one story versus the other. But anyways, so I'm reading both of those. I literally just started, so I can't give any like good, bad, whatever. But let me know if you want me to keep you updated on what I'm currently reading. And basically, I just kind of wanted to give you a taste of what this podcast is going to look like by picking some specific things that relate to like my life or what I grew up with, and to maybe let you know a little bit more about myself as we continue on this journey. We're going to start with an idiom. For those of you that don't know, basically an idiom is a phrase or an expression that has a non-literal meaning to whatever it's talking about. So the phrase could say something about eggs, but it has actually nothing to do with eggs at all whatsoever. You probably use idioms every day in your life without even realizing it. This is an idiom my mom said, I feel like, all the time growing up, and I hate to admit it, I did not know for a very long time what the idiom meant. I never really asked, and I just was like, okay, it's just something that like moms say or something, I don't know. So that's what I just assumed, and then I think I probably was like a teenager before I either asked her what it meant or kind of put the pieces together. The idiom is 6 of one, half dozen the other. If you're like, Jess, I can't believe you didn't know what that meant. 6 of one obviously means 6, and half dozen the other is also 6. I am not a math person, and that's why I do not teach math. I struggled with math for pretty much my whole schooling. It was definitely not my favorite subject and was really hard. I had to work really hard at it. So I didn't think of it that way. And I also feel like growing up, I didn't realize that say a carton of eggs that has 12 in it is a dozen. I feel like I just always knew it as a carton of eggs. We never got the half carton, which is the 6 eggs, or the 18 count cartons. We always just had 12. And so I think I just assumed that was called a carton of eggs and didn't think anything of oh, a dozen or whatever. Or I'm just making it all up because I don't want to be embarrassed by the fact that it took me a long time to figure out what it meant. So my mom used it a lot, and basically what it means is it expresses that two choices are essentially the same or they have very little difference, meaning you can choose this or you can choose that, and it's pretty much going to be the same. So I started looking back into where this idiom came from, why, how did it appear, who was saying it, how did it become popular. So the usage dates back to the 1700s, and it first appeared in print in a journal kept by a British naval officer, Ralph Clark, in 1790. The ship that he was on was wrecked in the Pacific Ocean, and he wrote the following: "Of all the places in the world, this is the greatest nest for rascals. It is impossible to trust any one of our men, hardly much more than any of the convicts. In short, there is no difference between soldiers, sailors, or convicts. There are 6 of one and half dozen the other." What I'm understanding him to say is that soldiers, sailor, convicts, they're all the same, which is not great. You would hope that your sailors have a lot more morality than convicts would, but apparently that's not what the naval officer thought. I don't know. And I don't know much about why the ship wrecked. But anyway, so that's, I guess, where it was first seen in writing that we know of. It said that it was probably, like I said, likely used before that documented instance. And it's kept its original form today. Meaning that oftentimes idioms will change, or phrases or sayings will change over time, either get shorter or the verbiage might change. But this one specifically has kept its same form. There are a couple of variations, which one is 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other, or 6 one way, half dozen the other way, or half a dozen in one hand, 6 in the other. I feel like my mom definitely shortened it to be, or I just heard it as 6 one, half dozen the other, and maybe that's why I got confused, because I was thinking 6 one, half dozen the other. I don't know. Anyways, so I don't feel like she shortened it even herself. Or maybe she didn't and I just was hearing things. Totally possible. Sorry, Mom. There are also some related terms to this that mean very similar things. I liked Tweedledum and Tweedledee, which I would love to know the origin of those. Let me know if you want me to dive into Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Then another one is same difference. The other one I saw was much of a muchness. I've never heard that one before, but apparently it means the same thing. Birds of a feather, which the only one that I know of birds of a feather is birds of a feather flock together, and I don't feel like that means the same thing, so I may have to dig into that. Then you have flip sides of the same coin, and peas in a pod, which I would think peas in a pod is something different, but it could, through time, it could definitely have started one way, changed the other. And then the opposite of these, so if you're saying, 6 of one, half dozen the other, the opposite of this would be black and white, night and day, apples and oranges, chalk and cheese, which I don't know where that comes from, chalk and cheese, and then polar opposites. That is the origin of 6 of one, half dozen the other. I know what it means now. I do use it from time to time, not very often, and I feel like I don't hear it very often, so I'm not sure if it was a more popular phrase when my parents were growing up, and then it was something that they used as well, and then it's just kind of faded away. Could be, I don't know. But anyway, so that is the origins of that idiom. We are going to jump into some specific words that either have been or are a part of my life. The first word we're going to jump into is y'all, and I'll tell you why. I spent from the age of 3 to 14 in Tennessee, so y'all was definitely in my vocabulary. I heard people say it all the time. No one really said, don't say that. I also love the story of this piece of fall decoration my mom has from her father, so my grandfather. So it is a scarecrow that says, Happy Fall, y'all, that he got for her when we were moving to Tennessee, because we were originally from New England. They got that as like a little joke, going down to Tennessee, Southern, all that good stuff. So yeah, so we're gonna dive into y'all. I automatically think of this word as a contraction, like isn't or would've, meaning that it's made up of two words, and you put them together using an apostrophe, so it would be made up of you and all. It's also considered a pronoun, more specifically a second person plural pronoun. If you're confused by this, because I had to take a second to think about it. So a pronoun refers to, he, she, they, them, we, plural pronouns in the first person, meaning that you're including yourself when you're talking. It's like we and us. And then the third person has been they or them. Right now, the word you is used for that second person plural word, but it doesn't really make sense because you, as we think of it, just means one. They say that y'all is a better usage of that, and I think that we see it more now. It's more accepted. Where does this come from? Obviously, you would assume that it came somewhere from the southern United States, which is true. It definitely is a lot more popular there. I think you can definitely trace it back to there. And because of that, I think it also has a bit of a bad reputation as being like improper. So in 1886, the New York Times ran a piece titled Old Southernisms that describes y'all as one of the most ridiculous of all the Southernisms. They thought that the use of y'all was seen as vulgar, low class, uncultured, and uneducated. So the etymology, which means the scientific study or origin of this, is hard to trace. I feel like there definitely have been, as I've started doing research on different things, there are some words that are very easy to trace, to be like, oh, yep, this is where it started and this is where it's going, yada, yada, yada. But for y'all, it's hard to trace. I scoured the internet and put together a timeline, basically, of where we think this might come from. So we are going all the way back to the 990s, 990. So that's the earliest that I saw from the sources that I looked at. So I will say that this specific one that I found was only mentioned in one of the sources, whereas the other dates were mentioned multiple times. So take it with a grain of salt. Another good idiom. I'll put that on my list. So this comes from Lives of the Saints of Benedict Abbot Elfric. I'm going to go right out here and tell you that I am going to try as hard as I can to pronounce things correctly and use my knowledge of breaking English words apart to say the words properly, but I will tell you that oftentimes names of people and names of places do not follow English rules, which I tell the kids all the time when they're like, but this, that, and I'm like, for whatever reasons, names of people and places don't always follow the rules. They don't have to follow the rules, so I'm gonna try my best, so don't come for me. This is Old English, and what was interesting was the way that it's written, and this is going to be interesting to say, it's spelled very much the way that you would pronounce things. So U, Y-O-U, is spelled out E-O-W, and all, A-L-L, is spelled E-A-L-L-E. That one I don't get as much. I'm going to try and read it the best I can. So here we go. It says, Ik for Christies Loof forlat you all and midderens lauta swa. Oh my goodness. Swa meaux for che. I'm gonna try that one more time. Ik for Christie's Luffy Loof Christie's Loof for late you all and middan nerdlice lusta swa meox for shay. So what that means is it says, I, for Christ's love, abandon you all and despised the lusts of the world as dung. Since we're on the topic of Old English, I found that thou would have been the singular version of you, and ye would have been plural. When I think of ye, I think of ye old tavern or whatever, which I was thinking to mean thee, but maybe not. Anyways, you can see ye, which is written out Y-E, used in King James version of the Bible. Which makes sense because King James, I think, if it's written out that way, is considered Old English, but don't quote me on that. Okay, so that was 990, 990s. We're going to move next, jump way far ahead into 1631. A Greek romance called The Fair Ethiopian, and it had a phrase that said, and this y'all know is true. Y'all is actually used in a lot of dramatic and poetic works because of the metric lines, so meaning the counts of the syllables. So in poetry you have certain timing or rhyming. I'm not a huge poetry person, so I'm not going to speak a ton about it, but basically iambic pentameter comes to mind. I hope I'm explaining this well. So thinking about the timing of it, if you said you all, it would be a different timing versus y'all. Does that make sense? I hope so. Anyways, okay, so that's where it was used in dramatic and poetic work a few different times, because there was another one in 1638 in a performance written by Sir John Sucking. Yep, that's what it says, Sir John Sucking, called The Goblin, and it had the phrase, a race of cripples are y'all, if you of snails, he could not else have escaped us. So you have it used there in another dramatic work. There is a widely accepted history of this word that dates back to the 18th century. It's a letter from New York that is sent from an Irish immigrant to his family that states, now I beg of y'all to come over here. And this was dated in 1737. And the reason it doesn't necessarily sound like y'all is because of the way it's spelled. So it's spelled Y-E space A-W. So ye, you have that from that Old English, and then ah. So that was 1737. And then, according to the Oxford Dictionary, the word first appeared in print in 1856. All of its examples are sources connected to the American South. So it is often thought that it has come from slave slang. And then in 2000, an article called The Nationalization of a Southernism from the Journal of English Linguistics suggested the word y'all will become more American rather than just Southern. It's used a lot in music and other forms of popular culture, so it's not just something that is seen in the South. You hear it a lot, in music all over the country, and so people will pick it up. I still use y'all every once in a while. I use it because, especially in the classroom, one of the big things you're talking about is when you're talking to your students, you don't want to gender it as you guys or you gals, which I feel when I first started teaching would say you guys. So I think I often would try to revert back to y'all because it's not genderized, y'all, just you all. I also looked at some close relatives of y'all, so that would be you guys, use, spell Y-O-U-S-E, and then use guys, which I don't know why, it just reminds me of a New York accent, use guys. And so then there's also the Brits have one that says you lot. And then I saw one that said yins. I guess the people of Pittsburgh say that that's their slang, Pittsburgh slang. I don't know. If you're from Pittsburgh or Pennsylvania, let me know. Also had youans, so Y-O-U--U-N-S, youans. The Caribbean Creole, or is it Caribbean? Maybe I should do one on that. Caribbean. But anyways, Creole, they say Alya, which is spelled A-L-L-Y-U-H, Alya, which I kind of like that, Alya. And then all y'all is a Western, Southern relation. So in Texas, and they use all y'all to be make more emphasis. So instead of just saying y'all, all y'all, I don't know, everyone in the room. We're talking to every single person. No matter what you think of this word, good, bad, it's here to stay. And I'm probably still going to use it. You probably might hear it in this podcast. And I often find that when I use that word, like if I'm just talking, not thinking about like talking, when I use that, it often will bring up a Southern accent in me that I don't always have now that I've lived out of the South for a while. I don't know. You tell me if you can hear it every once in a while. Although this next word might bring it up, might bring out my Southern accent. So you guys let me know. The last piece that I'm going to go through, I think, might be, I don't know. We'll see. Okay. It is crayon. C-R-A-Y-O-N. Crayon. Okay. And this is why I chose it. Remember, I grew up in the South. I think that might be where it comes from. So I did a lot of art things with the students that I work with. And so when I was talking about like school or art supplies that we'd need, one of my teacher friends, she told me I think a few different times, she's like, I love the way you say crayons. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't say it any different. Like I say it and she says it. I was like, I don't hear a difference at all. I think there is a big debate about the right way to say it. And so I kind of wanted to look into it as well. The history of like where the word comes from, and then also like, is there a correct pronunciation? Am I right? Is someone else right? Like, why are there different pronunciations? To start, if I look at this word from my reading teacher perspective, it would seem that the word should be pronounced crayons. And it should have 2 syllables because I see 2 vowels, one being a vowel team, which is A-Y in cray, and then the other one being the O in ons, crayons. How I say it, though, is crayon, like rhymes with man. So like as 1 syllable, crayon, man. That's how I say it, crayon. These would be the most common ways people say it, is either crayon or crayon. And then you have people who say it as, I'm going to try it. Okay, you have people who say it as crayons, like Don, so crayon, Don. I don't like that. Feels weird to me. And then the last one of a way that people pronounce it, which I don't get this one at all, is they pronounce it as crown. I was like, no, it's definitely not crown at all. I disagree. Like, I can get behind, like, obviously crayons make sense to me as a reading teacher. Crayon is how I grew up saying it, so that also makes sense to me. And even crayons, like the one that rhymes with Dawn, I could also get behind. But crowns, no. No, I cannot get behind it. And if you say crayon as crown, what? Why? Tell me why. Because I want to know. What I found most interesting is that people aren't split on how to say it based on where you live in the States. Because oftentimes, like, if you look at a map of, like, pronunciations, it'll be, like, one whole section, like, down here, like, in, like, southeast or southwest, northeast, northwest, and like you can kind of say, okay, this is how they all say it here, this is how they all say it here. But there is a couple of different maps that I looked at, and all the pronunciations, all 4 of those options, are spread out throughout the whole country. So I can't necessarily say maybe that crayon is how they say it in the South. I mean, maybe it's the most often, or maybe that's just how like my art teacher said it. I don't know how my parents say it. I actually do. I did ask my mom, and she said crayon. So I definitely didn't get it from them, because they say it as crayon. I say crayon. So maybe it was something I picked up from someone. What's interesting is, so if you look it up in the dictionary, because the dictionary has different pronunciations, right? It gives the first 3 as options for the pronunciation. So crayons, crayon, and crayons. That last one is hard to say. Crayon, Don. Anyways, okay. So it gives those 3 as options. So it does not give crown as one. So again, you're wrong. Sorry, you're wrong. Anyway, so I came across an article from Merriam-Webster in 2018 that says that they do not say that one pronunciation is correct or better than the others. So unfortunately, I don't think that there is a right answer here, but crown is still definitely the wrong one. I'm so sorry. Now, I wanted to kind of jump into a little bit of like where the word, I'm going to still say it as crayon because Merriam-Webster said it was okay. So that's the dictionary, and I'm going to go with it. Crayon comes from the French word cray, and it's spelled C-R-A-I-E, which originated from Latin, of course, creta, And they both mean chalk, which I was like, okay, interesting. I mean, they're related in some ways, but I want to see how they got from chalk, what we would think of as chalk, to crayon. But anyway, so it means chalk. It also says that it can mean clay, which I was like, okay, clay kind of makes sense, potentially. So in 16th century France, it is first called a chalk pencil, and then shortened to pencil. And when I was looking a little bit more at the etymology of crayon, what I found interesting, specifically on Crayola, because we know that that is the best crayon brand, in my opinion. I think most teachers would agree with me. Anyways, so the word Crayola was originally created by Alice Binney, who was a school teacher. Wow, it would make sense that the favorite brand of teachers was created by a teacher. Crayola crayon means oily chalk pencil. I was like, interesting. I wouldn't consider crayons to be oily, and I don't think of them as chalk. Pencil, I could kind of get behind in terms of shape and that you use it to write. I wanted to know why it's started being called oily chalk pencil. Why would it be called that when it's not necessarily something that we would put together nowadays? So Alice Binney, her husband Edwin, and his cousin Harold Smith were the founders of Binney and Smith Company in 1885, and they started creating pigments, like the chemicals to make tires black, which I did not know that tires were not black. They use a chemical to make it black. So, learned something new. Yay for me. And then they also used the red iron oxide, what is considered to be that classic barn red. Anyway, so they started with pigments. And then from there, they started to develop products for schools and for children, which makes sense since Alice was a school teacher. And they started with slate pencils. And then they created the world's first dustless chalk called chalk crayons. So let me back up a bit though. So what we think of as the modern crayon today was first made in Europe. And so they mixed charcoal and oil together. And so that's where the oily comes from, mixing that charcoal and oil together, right? So that's where the oily comes from. Okay, cool. Got that. And then at some point, I couldn't quite find when, they stopped using oil and started using wax instead because it provided a stronger stick and it was easier to work with. Yeah, so that's where crayon comes from, or crayon, or crayon. I think to finish this out, I'm going to try out a couple of small segments here and there, and you tell me if you want to hear more about it, longer episodes, longer pieces about it. But this one I'm going to call spelling snippets. And the reason I chose it is because I think it's something that I probably wondered as a kid, and I think it's still a question that people ask all the time if they haven't been specifically taught phonics rules. Why does fridge have a D in it and refrigerator does not? And there is a reason why. There actually is a rule for this one. It's a pretty good rule, and actually a pretty consistent rule now that I think about it, at least that I've come across. But anyway, so fridge, couple things here. One, we need to make the G, instead of making its G sound, it needs to make its J sound. And the way that we do that is by having an E, I, or Y come after it. In the word fridge, it has to be an E because E can be silent in words, whereas if we were to add a Y or an I, the pronunciation would be different because we don't often see those as silent letters. Okay, so we have F-R-I-G-E. Here's the problem though. Because of that silent E being there, that means that it makes the first vowel say its name. It's called the VCE, Magic E, Royal E, whatever you call it. The rule that we teach in phonics. Basically saying, okay, you have a word set up like this where you have a vowel and then a consonant and then a silent E. The E then gives its sound to whatever the first vowel is, and it makes it long, or say its name. So if we were to leave the word as F-R-I-G-E, we would have to pronounce it as frige. That doesn't make sense to go from refrigerator to frige. because in the word refrigerator, you have that refridge, you have that short I, so it needs to be short. So what they did was they added a silent letter to signify that the I, so whatever the vowel is, the first vowel, is going to stay short, and that E is still going to be silent. So it's called the DGE spelling rule, and so you'll see it in badge, judge, bridge. So there are a decent amount of words where that rule comes into effect. So that is the reason why fridge has a silent D and refrigerator does not. So that's your spelling snippets. Let me know if you want me to do other words or other like generalizations, rules. There are a lot. Unfortunately, though, I do tell my students there are often exceptions to the rules just because English does come from a variety of languages, and so sometimes we don't always get words that follow the rules, or sometimes there's not really a great rule. So I can go into that for days and days and days. So let me know if you want me to do a little bit more. So that is the end of episode 1. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to this. I have definitely enjoyed doing the research and just finding things out. I'm a little bit of a history nerd myself as well, and so combining like the English language and like my love of history has been really nice for me. Follow me on Instagram. You can leave comments for more either idioms, phrases, words that you want me to look into. I will definitely do that. It's a good way to learn something while you're, cooking, cleaning, driving, whatever you do when you listen to podcasts. And tune in next week. Thanks. Bye, y'all.